The images we've seen are from the movie The Passion of the Christ. Came out 14 years ago. I didn't know what I was up for. I watched it once 14 years ago. And ever since, that clip is all I manage. Have you seen it? Yeah, I know some watch it every year, but I don't manage. I find it extremely interesting, the story that is behind the making of the movie. And I've just watched just a few clips and interviews with the guy that plays Jesus, the actor Jim Caviezel. Caviezel is fine for now. So Caviezel. Mel Gibson, who is the director of the movie, sent him the script of a surfing movie. Like, for 15 years, Mel Gibson had it on his heart and felt like God was leading him to make that movie about the passion of Jesus, his suffering and crucifixion. And he kept it secret because he knew that the movie industry was not open to anything Christian, and if his plans were public, he would be in for all sorts of recriminations in the business, whatever, and no one believed it would actually make a profit. He poured millions of his own money into making of the movie because no one believed that anything Christian or from the Bible could actually do anything, make a profit. And then it became it's still, I think, the top R-rated movie ever. Was hugely successful. And after everyone saw that, a Christian movie like that could be that successful, then other Christian movies came out. But 14 years ago, it was unheard of. And so to keep it secret, he wanted Jim Caviezel, as the actor of Jesus, to keep it secret. He sent him a script for a surfing movie and said, look, I want you in that movie. And then when he rings him up, he says, no, it's actually not about that movie. I want you to play Jesus. And so Jim is a little bit surprised, of course. So they talk. The next day, Mel Gibson rings again and tries to talk him out of it. Said, look, I don't want to do this to you. You may never work in this industry again after you've accepted this role and whatever. And so Jim knew, might be a challenge. But then in the middle of the conversation, he says, do you know, Mel, that my initials, my name, the initials are JC, and I'm 33 years old? And then Mel Gibson goes, "You're freaking me out," hangs up. So they said about making this movie. Jim thought, right at the first conversations and throughout the movie is having this overwhelming thought, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy enough to play Jesus. And in preparation for the movie, he had to learn language and get into the story of all of that. He knew in order to play Jesus, I actually got to have a relationship with him. So I don't know what he was, maybe more nominal Catholic, but in preparation of the movie, he went to, one of the holy sites or retreat sites, and he learned about prayer and connecting to Jesus, and his faith came alive. He said, he crossed the Rubicon. It was just like, there was time before, and there was time when he accepted that role. He became serious about Jesus. He was praying and fasting while he did the movie. Every day he went to confession. Every day they had Eucharistic adoration. He was in worship all of the time in order to make it. And his overwhelming desire was that people would not see him, but they would see Jesus Christ. So he, as the actor, would disappear and Jesus would be everything. So that was his intention. And then, I don't know what happened, but it's the most freakish thing that happened. He had a hell of a time to make that movie. Like literally, he had pneumonia, both lungs filled up with fluid. He had his shoulder dislocated when he was hanging on the cross. Every time someone bumped the cross or whatever, his shoulder kept dislocating. He had hypothermia. Because, he's hanging on this cross, 8 hours in makeup, and then he's, pretty much naked, hanging on the cross in an icy cold Italy at the time, Everyone is rugging up, but he's hanging there for hours on that cross. He feels like suffocating, because that's what you do when you hang on a cross. It's on the highest, it's 1,000 feet cliff. So the highest point at the time, the wind is blowing. So it is icy cold, and you hang there for hours, and the blue of his body is not makeup. That's hypothermia. It's just like, they have to actually take him down and warm him up. Otherwise, he's not going to make it. So he's itching all over. His heart goes out. There's actually something wrong on his heart. So a doctor comes, he's hanging on the cross. The doctor checks his heart, and he says, Mel, do you know he could actually die? And then Mel is a gambling man, according to Jim. He says, Jim, what do you think? And Jim is continuing the movie, and after the movie finishes, he has heart surgery. And then the last day of shooting the movie, he's hit by lightning. I'm not kidding. Like, it is a bit freakish, isn't it? Like, you add it all up. It was, he did not, it pushed him to the edge of his human, mental, physical, spiritual endurance. And he couldn't make it by himself. That's why he's praying and fasting. He said, God, you got to do it. I cannot do it. There was, when they first put the cross on him, and they did it all real, the real size the cross would have been. They put it on Jim Caviezel, and he's in shock. He says, everyone, great acting. He was not acting. The cross was heavy and burdensome, and he said it's impossible for a human to actually do it. So he's acting that, and then there was this one scene while he was having, bearing the cross, carrying the cross, where he would have a scene with his mum, so Mary, and he would say, look, I'm making all things new. They take 4 takes of it. And every time he thought that he himself was too much in the foreground and Jesus didn't really come out, it just felt wrong. Well, he's having that cross. The next take, he's having that cross. Someone bumps at the cross. That dislocates his shoulder, and the sharp, sudden pain of the dislocated shoulder, and with the weight of the cross, he ends up falling down face first in the dust. So with then blood coming out of his mouth and his nose, and that time he was no longer acting. He got what he desired, and when he said the lines, it was just Jesus taking over at that time. But it cost everything. When he was on the cross, he didn't always feel holy. He felt like obscenities wanted to come out of him. It just was so hard. And he's hanging on the cross in utter pain, and the shoulder keeps separating, and the skin is itching all over because of hypothermia and everything. And people are at the foot of the cross sipping coffee, rugged up, all the film crew, whatever. They have one heater blowing as if that was one heater is going to do anything on the top of a 1,000-meter cliff with the wind blowing. It's just not doing anything. And they just, he's in a bad way, but everyone else doesn't really care. Most people. And isn't that how it was around Jesus as well? And one time he's just, Jim Caviezel, as Jesus is just on the cross crying, don't you care? And so he's having this scene, and murderous day, and it doesn't know how to survive it, and everything hurts, and it was super painful. And at that time, the wind was really blowing on the 1,000-foot cross, and it was right on the edge of the cliff, and the cross starts swinging, like, wow. The base of it is in cement, so but you don't know if anything goes wrong, you're just 1,000 feet down. So it was a hellish day. But then he thinks, finally, yes, okay, it's done. At least it's done. We've done the scene. Next morning, they look at the scene. And Mel Gibson looks at the scene and says, we can't use it. What do you mean we can't use it? Well, the cross is swinging. which basically means when in the movie theater people look at the scene, they look at the cross and the swinging cross, and they don't look at Jesus. Just shooting the scenes of the crucifixion took 5 weeks. So, what do you make of the list? The whipping scene. The whipping scene is the hardest one to watch. Jim Caviezel accidentally got hit because the actors were all Italian and they didn't understand English. And the English instructions, they couldn't translate into Italy. So what Mel Gibson wanted was that they take the whip and hit him like a baseball bat, just swing it like that. But they were Italians, they don't know baseball. So they said, cricket is close enough. So they do it the cricket way, they run up. And because the momentum of running up takes the whip around that little plank they had in front of Jim Caviezel, and it hits him. Just one, about 35 centimeters, ripping open his flesh. But that's just one. I mean, just imagine how many Jesus got. But that one was, just a bit of a glimpse of what Jesus suffered. So I found that extremely interesting. Why did Jim Caviezel have such a hard time shooting the movie The Passion? What do you think? Is there something going on? I think there's something going on. So it's a bit freakish. You could say spooky or spiritual. There is something going on. You could say on the one hand, maybe the devil didn't want the movie to be shot. The devil did not want the movie to actually... So there was spiritual warfare going on and trying to take Jim out and trying to take Mel out and the whole... Because another guy got hit twice. Same guy got hit twice by lightning. But spiritual warfare was also going on when Jesus was on the cross. Jesus even said it, Satan, this is your hour when darkness reigns. And Satan did his best. He reigned and killed Jesus. But, his greatest triumph turned into his worst defeat. He just didn't see it coming. Yes, Jesus was dead and all the forces of hell, had a go at Jesus, and he was extreme suffering. And you think once he's in the tomb, it's finished. But it turned out to be the once and for all sacrifice for all of our sin and all the evil. And Satan no longer has rights because the price has been paid for our sin. So it turned into this huge victory. And I would think that Satan had a really good go at the film set of the Passion of the Christ. But ultimately, God was in control, and God was actually operating. And what do you think God was doing at the time? He helped Jim to play him right, to be the correct Jesus, for the actor Jim Caviezel to disappear and Jesus to shine. And he gave everyone a glimpse, you just a little bit of a taste of the suffering, a taste of how real it is, And, when I just investigated it and just heard all the stories, for me, it confirms that the story of Jesus did suffer and die for us. And it's the heart of the message of redemption. That's why we're in church. That's why we know we overcome. That's why we know that our sins are forgiven. And it's not just a religious story. It actually happened. And the importance and the magnitude of it is confirmed by the warfare that was going on by shooting the movie. That's how my thinking goes. And then Jim, his preparation was good. He said, I'm not good enough. That's humility. So if you want to be in the footsteps of Jesus, that's all of our preparation. We're not good enough. But God is not using, the best. He's using those that come to him. And with those, he can do anything. Jim's goal was that when people look at him, they never see him, but they see Jesus. Do you know that's our goal as well in life? Do you know that as soon as you become a Christian, the goal of your life is that when people look in your direction, they see Jesus. They see a reflection of the kingdom. They see a reflection of Christ. The Bible is very clear that we all represent Jesus. You know, the Bible says we are ambassadors of Christ. We are in his stead. Jesus says, he who sees you sees me. He who hears you hears me. And there's something happening in the Bible where, you know, Jesus then rose from the dead. He pours out the Spirit on his disciples, and, you know, he confirms to everyone that his crucifixion was real and his resurrection was real. And, you know, they preach. And then the disciples experience exactly what Jesus experienced. They preach the kingdom and they heal the sick, and then persecution comes. They get hammered in the same way with persecution. Even though it shouldn't happen. I mean, they only do good things. People get healed. But they have the resistance. People don't want to hear. People don't want to give up power. People didn't want to give up their lifestyles. And so they want to silence the messenger. And they do. And the first guy that dies is Stephen. And he dies exactly like Jesus. You know, trumped up charges. They ends up in front of the Sanhedrin. You know, it pretty much plays out like Jesus' own trial played out, and trumped up charges. And they finally, it's a mob killing. And then Stephen dies with 2 words on his lips. And those 2 words are exactly the same ones that Jesus spoke on the cross. He says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Father, don't hold this sin against them. So that's number 1. And the other one is, you know, Jesus said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And Stephen as well, into your hands I commit my spirit. That's no accident. You know, exactly the same words. Any reader of the gospel and the book of Acts, where the stories are told, are meant to make the connection. Jesus is the one that Stephen follows, and he is in his steps, and he acts like Jesus. He's now the voice and the hand of Jesus. He's an ambassador of Jesus. And that's the role of all Christians. But do we want that? The Apostle Paul, and a number of passages all through the New Testament, he talks quite a bit of suffering. And he talks about his sufferings as, you know, when he suffers, he says, I'm joining in the sufferings of Christ. So maybe I'll just give you a few. Philippians chapter 3. This is Paul talking. He says, I want to know Christ. Yes, to know the power of his resurrection. And that's nice, you know, the power of the resurrection. But then, and participation in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, and so somehow attaining to the resurrection from the dead. Want to know Christ, the resurrection, but also the participation in his sufferings. 2 Corinthians 1, we share abundantly in the sufferings of Christ. 2 Corinthians 4, we always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. Romans 8, we share in his sufferings, in order that we may also share in his glory. I'm suffering for you. That's Colossians 1, what is still lacking in regard to Christ's afflictions for the sake of his body, which is the church. And then Galatians 6, I bear on my body the marks of Jesus. Which basically he bears on his body the marks of torture and suffering and persecution. And in this way he's sharing the sufferings of Christ. What does it exactly mean? I think number 1, it means that Jesus says, the way I lived, you will live. The way I've overcome evil, by doing good and suffering and sacrificing. That's how you overcome evil in the world. You share my sufferings, you walk my path, and you live a life of sacrifice. And you don't count the cost. You don't try to hold on to your life and all the things of the world. You're not of the world. You belong to me. And you go a life of suffering and redemption for other people. And you overcome evil with good. It's going to cost you. And if you want to know me and walk in fellowship with me and fellowship and intimacy with me, yes, know the resurrection and the power. Know how to perform miracles and heal people, but also know sharing in my sufferings. So that's one level. I think there's another level where these sufferings that we suffer are actually still His. And they are His because He loves us. When Paul persecuted the church and did horrible things to the church, to the people, Jesus appeared to him on the road and He asked him a question. He said, Paul, why do you persecute me? He didn't say, why do you persecute my church? Why do you persecute my disciples? He said, why do you persecute me? And there's something about, any mother or father or anyone that loves anyone deeply, if the person that you love gets hurt, you're hurting. Would you agree? So you can't. So whenever we're hurting, whenever we, take up our cross, and whenever we are under it, Jesus is hurting, Jesus is suffering, and it's still the suffering that He is willing to give to redeem a world, to save a world. His heart is still breaking over the people that reject Him. It's a love of God that is willing to suffer over the stubbornness and rebellion of people. And He invites us to walk that walk. Let your heart break for the things that break God's heart. If you want to know God, if you want to know what drives Jesus, if you want to know His deepest heart, you got to learn to share in His sufferings. You got to understand Good Friday, what it was all about. It wasn't just a one-off day. Yeah, it was a once for all sacrifice, but the willingness to give of Himself, that's His character. That's what He's like. That's what He's still doing. And He invites us to participate in it and to share in it. And especially on Good Friday, where we sing songs and we are happy about our redemption and forgiveness of sins, join the walk. See the cross as an invitation that heaven's doors are open for you. You can have faith in this Jesus Christ that died for you, but then you enter into a lifestyle of obedience to Him, and you get to know Him. You get to know His heart, and then you share in His sufferings. And before you misunderstand, before you think, now I get this hard talk, Good Friday, like, I've got to be obedient, and it's all hard and blah. The motivation in the Bible is completely different. I mean, Paul wasn't self-pitying when he talked about knowing the sufferings of Christ. He says, we are compelled by the love of Christ. Why are we sharing in the sufferings of Christ in this world? Why do we want to reach a city for God? Why do we do anything as Christians? Because love compels us. And if love doesn't compel you, stay home. You're not right yet. Just humbly invite the Holy Spirit in you. Cry out for mercy. But if you do it duty bound and you rather not do it, it's not right. Once we know Christ, that's why Paul wants to know Christ, but once you do, and you get filled with the life of God and the Spirit of God, you get compelled by love, and you can't stay home. And you know what it means, but love doesn't count the cost. So, Good Friday. We just have all eyes on Jesus. But I think, the Passion of the Christ, how the movie was made, it's just a big confirmation what is involved. And that suffering was real. The story is real. Jesus is real. He died on the cross for all of us. And this morning, Good Friday, we just have an opportunity just to remember it again, appreciate it again. And maybe for the first time in your life, you can actually put your trust in him. You can actually come to him this morning. Have your life changed. Amen.